Okay, this week I'm joined by Thomas Prosser. He's a reader in European social policy at Cardiff University. He's the author of the new book, What's in It for Me? Self-Interest and Political Difference, which released this year. For those who don't know you or your work, could you just give us a bit of background into your research interests and why you've written this book?
Yeah, of course. Well, very nice to be here, Ryan. And as you were saying, my name is Thomas Prosser, and I'm a reader at Cardiff University in European social policy. My main research interest, the thing that underpins all of my interests, is institutional theory. I would say now institutional theory is about incentive structures for actors and individuals, whether they're voters or firms. And what institutional theory does is it really theorizes how those incentive structures evolve. It theorizes where they originated from. And I've done a lot of work on this over the years. And I thought really that this was tremendously relevant to current events, because since 2016, we've obviously lived in a very partisan climate, and there's been lots of argument over self-interest. Some people call it the selfish or treacherous or stupid or whatever. And I thought to myself that institutional theory has got a really good angle on this, because it shows how interests and incentive structures emerge and where they're going. And I think the beauty of it is that if you look at it from this point of view, you really take the sting out of politics. I think also that it does really throw a new light on this subject. We're going to talk, I know, about Jonathan Haidt later. But of course, Professor Haidt's written about similar issues, but from the standpoint of psychology. As I said, I'm more interested in the incentive structures, the socio-economic incentive structures, and how they develop and how they shed light on self-interest and our politics today.
Yeah, so you mentioned Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. Do you think there is any overlap between his work and yours?
Yes, definitely. I've always liked Jonathan Haidt. Funnily enough, I was reading an article of his late last night. It's on social media and democracy. I think it's in The Atlantic. It's really worth reading. But no, I first read Haidt about 7 or 8 years ago now, when the Righteous Mind came out. And yeah, and I think the similarity is that we don't see values as things that can be switched on and off. They're very deep-rooted. There are all sorts of influences upon our values. For Haidt, they are psychological influences. You know, his theory about how we make moral judgments based on our feelings. For me, it's more a question of social economics. I was explaining earlier how I favour institutional theory, and that shows how our interests are nested within political and economic incentive structures, which are conditioned by historical development. And I think that what I have in common with Haidt is we show that it's very difficult to change them. They're very deep-rooted, and therefore the kind of moralistic approach to politics that we see today has little. It is really unfortunate.
So this book's about self-interest. Could you go into a bit about what you mean by that term? Do you mean it in a sort of classical economic rational actor type of way, or do you mean something very different?
I think that there's obviously been a lot of work over the centuries on self-interest. The classical economic interpretation is that, we are all self-interested and that's good and everything. But in recent decades, there's been far more of an emphasis on altruism. Evolutionary biology, for example, has discovered instances of altruism among wild animals, and there were all sorts of other findings on altruism in psychology and economics. I would take human motivations to be mixed. We can be selfish, we are selfish, we can be altruistic, we are altruistic, and the extent to which those characteristics shine through, reflects the structures that I've just talked about. So I didn't, it's not a book that goes into the nuts and bolts of what self-interest is. I take a more heterodox understanding of it, following recent development, and then I show how of course it's perennial. Self-interest infuses all of our politics. Of course altruism also does, but it's vital that we understand self-interest. I would be very suspicious of someone who says that their politics are entirely altruistic. It's just unrealistic. Maybe for individuals, okay, you do get outliers or exceptions. For groups, no, I don't believe that comes about. Because with groups you tend not to get outliers.
So chapter 3 of the book is called "Are Brexiters Stupid?" We're both talking from Wales, which it's had a major political impact on the country, and the rest of the UK as well. It's consumed our politics since 2016. What's your diagnosis for why that occurred, and how does it relate to your thesis on self-interest?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was one of the most active Remain campaigners in Wales in 2016. Actually, I was down in Cardiff, and I also helped my mother set up in Llandailo, West Wales. She covered the whole of West Wales, but that's another story about the lack of resources for the campaign. And I really began to get interested in this topic there, because I was like lots of people. I thought, why would people in the valleys vote to leave the European Union? There's so much EU funding. There are very few immigrants in a town like Ebbw Vale. So yes, I was mystified. And I'd like to think that I've reflected in the years since. I certainly don't think the chapter heading is something of a provocation. The publishers like them. I certainly don't think Brexiters are stupid. I think that on the one hand, it reflects culture. As anthropologists and sociologists have long known, cultural values are functional. They fulfill certain functions. And if you're a low-income, poorly educated voter in South Wales, such values might give you fixed reference points, might make you feel safe, more secure. And I think what's interesting is that liberals are very good at emphasizing with the functions of culturally conservative values in the developing world. You see that when it's people in the developing world who have culturally conservative values, it's quite easy for liberals to see the utility of such values and the function. Now, I'm certainly not saying I still don't agree with the various cultural the cultural values of most leavers. But I think it's important to understand them. And of course, from the there's an economic argument, there's an economic issue, sorry, which is really interesting as well. I think that I still do struggle to understand why many of these people voted to leave the European Union, given the exposure of low-income communities to a hard Brexit and so on and so forth. And indeed, survey evidence actually shows that low-income Leave voters were more scared of a no-deal Brexit than high-income Leave voters. So there was such an effect. But on the other hand, there's a concept called values rationality, which I refer to in the book. And this basically stipulates that if values are broadly functional and consistent with the goals and interests of a group, they will then see out the logic, the internal logic of those values. So low income or low education Brexiters in South Wales might be willing to endure short-term economic pain or even long-term economic pain. Values are very powerful things, and as I said, I think what's very interesting is that the Liberals find it easy to understand the function of culturally conservative values in the developing world.
And one of the chapters is on the New Left, which you characterise as the sort of Jeremy Corbyn type left on the Labour Party. And 2019 was, of course, a huge watershed moment for British politics, the worst defeat for the Labour Party since 1935.
Yeah.
The loss of, I think, 43 Red Wall seats.
Yeah.
Have you got any analysis on why that occurred and what they failed to grasp about your thesis on self-interest?
I think on the one hand, this is part of a much a broader trend. We're seeing the collapse of social democratic coalitions across the Western world. In Germany, the SPD are down to something like 15% or even less in opinion polls, which is simply incredible and very worrying, I think. And I think what is happening is that the interests of the two groups that make up social democratic coalitions, on the one hand, you have poorer, although not necessarily the poorest, but poorer production work, industrial workers, and people like them. And on the other hand, you have more affluent demographics who tend to work in the public sector or tend to be social cultural specialists. And what I argue in the book is that I think the interests of those demographics are very different. I don't really see anything, or I don't see much that unites them, even if you look closely at commonalities of interest in the socio-economic sphere. They're more different than first meets the eye. There's some research which shows that I think nationalisation and something that I forget has potential to bridge differences in interest. But if you look at the rest of it, there's a different desire for things like benefits, because the benefits and employment benefits and sickness benefits, they tend to be demands of low-income deciles, whereas higher-income deciles tend to favour things like tuition fees, public sector pay, parental leave, and on the cultural side, the difference is very stark. So I think that I think that Labour were really up against it in 2019 because social democratic coalitions were up against this pressure, long-term pressure across countries. I think if Keir Starmer had been Labour leader in 2019, I think it might not have been so severe, but I really do think he would have lost because it was about Brexit. I think forward Starmer's prospects and so on and so forth are quite good, but I think in this specific election, I think he would have lost. So you have to see Labour's defeat in 2019 in these terms, in the context of a profound crisis of social democracy across the Western world. I'm not sure social democratic coalitions can ever be put together again. They're a bit like Humpty Dumpty, but no. And on the other hand, of course, there were specific things common to Britain. I think that in terms of cultural values, I think that it was unfortunate that Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, but because people in the red wall seats tend to have quite strongly conservative cultural values. They tend to be quite patriotic, and a more moderate figure like Keir Starmer is far more effective at communicating that. I think the key thing for a Labour leader is that he just doesn't really offend these people. I think with Starmer, he's certainly not a cultural conservative, but he's someone, who's comfortable being photographed with the flag and so on and so forth. And I think that's an absolute minimum. Whereas if you're given Corbyn's baggage and so on and so forth, it was always going to be difficult with such voters.
And you mentioned the crisis of social democracy there, and there's a chapter 6. It's called "Is Social Democracy Finished?"
Yeah.
Now, what is your answer to that? And on the other side, what merits do you still think it has as a political ideology?
Well, as I said, I think that social democracy finds itself in a period of deep crisis. As I was saying, the two parts of its support base really do seem to have different interests, and it's not. I think people also make the mistake of thinking that social democratic policy coalitions are just something sort of that's natural, like the sun rising in the morning. That's not the case at all, though. In most countries, there was a very good paper published in British Journal of Political Science a few years ago, which showed that especially among low-income voters, culturally conservative values correlate with left-wing economic values. So basically, that means that it's more natural for parties to group together cultural conservatives and people who prefer economic redistribution. Now, of course, the social democratic experiment is predicated on something different, redistribution and liberal cultural values. And I think that that it came together in the West because of the nature of Western political space at the time of the Industrial Revolution, and I think that sounds ever so cynical and what have you. Maybe lockdown's getting to me, but I should say that I think that. That I think that social democratic coalitions are extremely important. As I argue in the book, they give something to everyone. They are a compromise. I think it's notable that there aren't really any major social democratic thinkers like conservatives have Adam Smith, Marxists have Marx, and that liberals have Mill, and that reflects the fact that it's a bit of a compromise. And I think it's very difficult. I think that giving recommendations and saying what should happen is always very difficult, and particularly when you're like me and tend to favour structural explanations. But I think that some ground has to be given to the culturally conservative values of voters in places like the Red Wall. I think there has to be a genuine compromise recognition of the fact that these values are not pathological, they reflect something deeper. I know, of course, Labour is a left liberal party, it should remain a left liberal party, but there should be more compromise. I don't have in mind the kind of thing that Danish Social Democrats have done. I think Keir Starmer's doing very well. He's showing them that, you know, that he has no problem with the patriotism agenda, but at the same time, and also that he's willing to make sensible compromises on immigration. The appointment of Claire Ainsley has his policy director is very interesting. I think Claire Ainsley wrote a book a year or so ago, which I cite actually, which talked about these issues. So I don't think that all is finished for social democracy. But I do think it's going to be tough. I don't know if Humpty can be put back together again. It really is going to be tough. But I certainly hope so. And I find myself actually nodding along with Starmer's Labour.
And one thing that's dominated our politics in the United States particularly is partisanship, which has had a major impact here. I don't think we're as bad as America, especially from the scenes we've seen in the last couple of days. But do you think with Brexit now formally concluded that the country has an opportunity to move beyond these partisan divisions, or do you think they will persist in the form of lockdown skepticism and climate politics?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an uphill struggle. To be honest with you, I don't think we're going to get as bad as the United States of America. I actually, I don't, of course, I pay attention to the US, but I can't say I have any great specialist knowledge of it. I have a more specialist knowledge of Poland, actually. And in Poland, there are that's the European case, which is most similar to the US, although religion, as in the US, plays an important role there. In the British case, I was watching a clip yesterday by Paula Surridge, the new deputy director of UK and a Changing Europe, and she was saying that lots of people are going to want to be vindicated. There's going to be a war of interpretations, I think, in the next few years, and of course it correlates closely with positions on the lockdown. I think it's a kind of thing that you hope will just simmer, will just gradually fade away. I hope. I think I always thought prior to Brexit, prior to 2016, I always thought that the country that was most likely to undergo a Trump-style moment was France. I thought, I was thinking, okay, there's a good chance Marine Le Pen could win in 2017. And of course, it could have, had had things worked out just a bit differently, she could be president, Britain could be in the European Union, Donald Trump could still be doing the apprentice or whatever. That's a way history matters. It could have worked out differently. And I think in France, what's happened is it since 2015, I get the impression that the heat has just come out a bit. And you would, of course, politics is still very adversarial, but you hope that gradually things will calm down. I think that when I was growing up, my father always told me stories about the 1970s. That was a mad time, a very partisan time. And of course, when he was telling me those stories, it was the 90s, and it just sounded like another world. And of course, things gradually changed, and I hope they gradually change again.
And has the pandemic since it emerged in March of last year now, has it taught you anything about some of the things you've been writing about?
Yeah, with the pandemic, I'd finished the book in about March. So obviously, the book wasn't written with the pandemic in mind. I did manage to get a few references to coronavirus into the book, but because I was sent proofs and everything in late spring, and I was able to make a few changes just to get a few references. I think, as we were saying, attitudes towards lockdown, if I'm not mistaken, correlate quite heavily with attitudes towards Brexit. So Leavers are more sceptical of the lockdown measures. And I think that I was thinking about this this week, actually. I think that we have a much lower tolerance for views which can be shown to be clearly anti-scientific. I don't, 50% of Americans may not believe in evolution or something like that, but I don't believe that should be taught at all in schools, because it's, for obvious reasons. The same, and it's the same, I think, with climate change and the vaccine, where there is a solid scientific consensus on something. I think that has to be reflected in public policy, because of the nature, the nature of how science works. Now, something like leaving the European Union, which involves questions like sovereignty and immigration, is different, but because you can't ever give a definitive scientific answer to such questions in the way that you can give a definitive scientific answer about evolution or coronavirus or what have you. So I think there's a key difference there. There's a far greater need for compromise on issues which come down to philosophy and interest rather than hard science.
Yeah, that's interesting. And well, to finish, I've got two questions. The first one is, if you're a political strategist, what advice would you have for the two main parties? And I'll come to the second one after you've answered this one.
I think to the two main parties, I'll start with Labour first, because that's easy, and I've said something about that. I would say to Labour, keep your eye on the red wall seats, because it's very interesting. In the 1990s, although there were more low-income voters in the Labour Party, the middle classes were the swing voters or the median voters. They were able just to vote Conservative. So it is crucial that such voters weren't upset. Now, one of history's ironies, the situation is reversed. Middle class voters, social cultural professionals, public sector workers tend to dominate Labour. But voters in the red wall seats are the swing voters, if you like, the median voters, and they are cultural conservatives. And I think this is what Keir Starmer and Claire Ainsley are doing. They're showing they're really being very disciplined. They're ignoring Twitter. It's very instructive that someone like Claire Ainsley has only got 6,000 or 7,000 Twitter followers. It's deliberate, okay? And you look at various campaign group MPs who might have 100,000 followers. They might be getting likes, but the influence lies with Claire Ainsley. They don't care about Twitter. They shouldn't be, because it's as we always say, it's not Britain. So I would say to Labour, the red wall voters are pretty culturally conservative. They are the new median voter. And I think with the Conservatives, I guess the game is about mobilising over culture, making culture more salient. Because the achievement of Boris Johnson in the 2019 election was to unite cultural conservatives of different income deciles, because he made it about culture. And now obviously Brexit having been delivered, and policy debates moving more into competence, means that Labour finds itself in a stronger position. Because this year has been about the politics of competence and Boris Johnson. Well, as people say. So I guess if you were going to be quite cynical about it, you would say to the Conservative that it's important to create sort of wedge issues that involve culture, so that they can they can put together again that coalition. Culture does seem to be particularly salient these days across the West. I think that might be changing though. A topic like coronavirus, as we just said, is far more of a scientific issue, which lends itself to the politics of competence and technocracy, and I think that of course is danger for the Conservatives. I think that there's a lot of you can't make broad judgments about voting. There are a lot of voters in these countries. In these constituencies, sorry, not countries, in these constituencies who are swayed on competence. They're not just all hardcore cultural conservatives. They are fairly diverse seats, and all seats are diverse in a way, but there's an awful lot of people in those seats who can be swayed if they see competence from Keir Starmer, and also if he's making reasonable adjustments on things like patriotism and immigration and so forth.
And the second part of the question is, what advice would you have for researchers going forward?
Yeah, I think that I would simply say that the issue of, I don't think institutional theory has been sufficiently used by mainstream political science. As I was saying, institutional theory is all about incentive structures and how they unfold. And mainstream political science, particularly the study of parties, tends to see this in rational choice terms. So the incentive structures promote rational choice. That's associated with thinkers like Downs and Duverger. But I think that what I've tried to do, I'm a historical institutionalist, and I've tried to show in the book, I always try to show in my research, that such structures or incentive structures are contingent upon historical development. They vary from one country to another, and in fact we're working on a project at the moment that's make a more formal academic project. My book is aimed at the crossover market, but we're working on a project that shows that the programs of parties in the socio-economic sphere are subject to all sorts of historical and ideological influence. They don't merely reflect the rational choice incentive structures of Downs. So we're trying to show that, and I guess that's what I'd like to say to scholars is pay attention to historical institutionalism. I'm a bit of an evangelist for the approach. Of course, it's just another side of the same coin. I think that the party politics scholarship is great, and Downs is great and everything, but I think that such explanations only get us so far. We've got to think about other influences.
Okay, Thomas Prosser, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.